In 1984, Barry Marshall, a young Australian doctor, walked into his lab, picked up a flask teeming with bacteria, and drank it. He hadn't lost his mind. He was desperate. For years, he'd watched patients suffer from agonizing stomach ulcers, often told their own stress or diet was to blame. But Marshall believed he'd found the real culprit, a microscopic enemy no one else in medicine would acknowledge. So, with no other options, he decided to turn his own body into the ultimate experiment. What kind of pathogen could possibly survive the acid bath of the human stomach? And how could one man's audacious act dismantle decades of medical dogma, ultimately saving millions of lives? Before Marshall, the medical world held a firm belief about stomach ulcers. For generations, doctors attributed the searing pain and chronic debilitation to a volatile cocktail of stress, spicy foods, and an overproduction of stomach acid. It was an elegant, if incorrect, theory that made a certain kind of sense. The stomach was a harsh environment. No known bacteria could possibly thrive there, let alone cause such persistent damage. Patients were given restrictive diets, prescribed antacids for life, and in severe cases, endured radical surgeries that removed parts of their stomach or severed vital nerves. It was a life sentence for millions, and Barry Marshall, fresh out of medical school, found himself inheriting this entrenched orthodoxy. But in 1981, his path crossed with Robin Warren, a pathologist at Royal Perth Hospital, a quiet man who kept noticing something odd under his microscope, tiny, spiral-shaped bacteria clinging to inflamed stomach tissue in biopsy samples. Most pathologists dismissed them as contaminants, stray microbes that had no business being there. But Warren was meticulous. He saw them too often in too many inflamed samples to be a coincidence. He just needed someone to listen, someone with the clinical drive to turn a microscopic observation into a medical revolution. Marshall, with his restless curiosity, wasn't one to simply memorize. Warren's observations ignited something in him. He knew instinctively that if these bacteria were truly causing gastritis, inflammation of the stomach lining, then they could be linked to ulcers too. Together, they started dinning. In 1982, after months of painstaking work, they achieved the impossible. They successfully cultured the elusive bacterium in the lab, a slow-growing organism later named Helicobacter pylori. The evidence began to mount. Their initial findings, published in 1983, presented a compelling case. Pylori wasn't just present in inflamed stomachs, it was consistently found in patients suffering from gastritis and peptic ulcers. But the scientific establishment was unyielding. The very idea of bacteria surviving, let alone thriving, in the highly acidic environment of the stomach was considered preposterous, a challenge to fundamental biological principles. Their papers were met with skepticism, outright disbelief, and often outright rejection for publication. Marshall later recalled, "Most of my work was rejected for publication. My results were disputed and disbelieved." They were fighting against decades of deeply ingrained medical consensus, and without definitive proof, their revolutionary idea was nowhere. Marshall and Warren needed irrefutable proof, something beyond correlation. They needed to satisfy Koch's postulates, the gold standard for proving a microorganism causes a disease. That meant infecting a healthy subject with H. pylori and showing it caused gastritis. Animal experiments, however, yielded no clear results. Pigs and other models just didn't develop the same kind of inflammation. Without a viable animal model, and with no ethics committee on Earth willing to approve infecting human volunteers with a potentially ulcer-causing bacteria, Marshall found himself at an impasse. The medical community continued to scoff, dismissing their findings as an anomaly and irrelevant curiosity. His career, his reputation, and all the years of tireless work hung in the balance. The prevailing dogma was too strong, the skepticism too deep. He needed to make an undeniable statement to demonstrate the pathogenic power of H. pylori. Pylori, in the most direct, unambiguous way possible. Driven to the brink of frustration, Marshall made a decision that would define his legacy. He would become his own test subject. If no one else would believe the bacteria could cause disease, he would prove it with his own body. He prepared a liquid culture teeming with Helicobacter pylori from a patient with severe gastritis. Then, without a second thought, he drank it. It was a calculated risk, a desperate act of scientific self-experimentation that few would dare. He wasn't seeking a fully formed ulcer, but rather to show the initial stages of inflammation, gastritis, caused directly by the bacteria. The clock started ticking on one of the most daring medical experiments in history. For the first few days, nothing happened. Marshall waited, in anxious excitement building. Then, around day 5, the symptoms began. He felt a profound nausea, a heavy, unsettling feeling in his stomach. His breath grew foul, an undeniable sign of bacterial activity. By day 8, the symptoms intensified, becoming unmistakable signs of acute gastritis. He was fatigued, vomiting, and experiencing the classic discomfort he'd seen in countless patients. An endoscopy confirmed it. His stomach lining was red, inflamed, and riddled with H. Pylori bacteria. The self-inflicted infection was undeniable. He had proven his point. He hadn't developed a full peptic ulcer, but the acute gastritis he experienced was a powerful demonstration of the bacterium's pathogenicity. With this direct evidence, he began a course of antibiotics, and within days, his symptoms vanished. The infection cleared. His bold, self-sacrificing act finally provided the crucial missing piece of the puzzle. Despite Marshall's dramatic self-experiment, widespread acceptance didn't happen overnight. It took years, nearly a decade, for the medical community to slowly turn. Independent studies started to emerge, corroborating his and Warren's findings. The weight of evidence gradually became too heavy to ignore. The turning point arrived in 1994 when the U.S. National Institutes of Health, NIH, held a consensus conference. After reviewing all the available data, the panel officially endorsed antibiotic treatment for ulcers associated with H. pylori. It was a seismic shift. Peptic ulcer disease, once a chronic, disabling condition, often requiring lifelong medication or surgery, was suddenly redefined as a curable infection. Millions of lives were profoundly changed. Finally, in 2005, Barry Marshall and Robin Warren's extraordinary persistence and scientific courage were recognized with the Nobel Prize in Physiology or Medicine, acknowledging their revolutionary discovery and its immense impact on global health. Marshall's journey reminds us that science isn't always a smooth progression of accepted facts. Sometimes it's a brutal fight against ingrained beliefs, a lonely struggle against a chorus of doubters. His story is a powerful testament to the value of skepticism, not just against new ideas, but against old ones too. It underscores that truly transformative discoveries often come from those brave enough to question the unquestionable, to look closer when everyone else looks away, and to risk everything, even their own health, for the truth. His desperate act of drinking those bacteria didn't just earn him a Nobel Prize. It saved millions from suffering, demonstrating that even the most formidable medical dogmas can crumble under the weight of courageous, persistent scientific inquiry. What other long-held beliefs in science might be waiting for their own Barry Marshall to challenge them? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and if you found this journey of scientific defiance compelling, consider subscribing for more stories of the people who reshaped our world.